What would you do if you spent years caring for your mother, only to be thrown out of your own home by your brother just 2 days after she passed away? What happens when the house where you stayed up all night praying for her recovery suddenly locks its doors against you? And then, at the will reading, when everyone believes you've lost everything, a single file is opened, and the entire story changes. Today's story isn't just about inheritance. It's about justice, a mother's silent love, and a daughter who was underestimated her whole life, not knowing her mother had already planned everything for her future. If you've ever felt ignored or unseen in your own family, this story will touch your heart. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is our strength. Let's begin. My name is Alina Crawford, and for 30 years, I lived in a house where my worth was measured by my silence. 3 weeks after my father was buried, my older brother stood in the doorway of our childhood home, keys in his hand, and told me something I think he had rehearsed for years. "Dad was clear," he said. "The house, the investments, the business, they're mine. You've always known that. Don't make this ugly." Ugly. That was the word he used while my mother's perfume still lingered in the hallway and the condolence flowers hadn't even begun to wilt. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The certainty in his voice did the shouting for him. I had moved back home 2 years earlier when Mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I rearranged my shifts at the hospital. I learned how to read lab reports the way other daughters memorize recipes. I sat beside her at 3 a.m. when the pain medication wore off and she was too proud to wake anyone. Anyone, meaning me. Because my brother, Daniel, visited when it was convenient. He would sweep in wearing tailored suits, bring flowers he hadn't picked himself, kiss her forehead, and glance at his watch like time itself was a favor he was granting her. But when she vomited from chemo, it was my hands that cleaned her. When she cried because her hair was falling out in clumps, it was my shoulder she soaked with tears. When she whispered, "I'm scared," it was into my ear. And yet, in my father's world, Daniel was the legacy. I was the obligation. After the funeral, Daniel waited exactly 48 hours before changing the locks. My clothes were boxed, my childhood trophies were stacked like forgotten clutter, my nursing textbooks, the ones I paid for with night shifts and student loans, were shoved into trash bags and left on the porch. "Don't drag this out," he said when I called him. "You've always been emotional. Dad didn't want drama." Drama. That was the word he used to describe grief. I remember standing on that lawn, holding a cracked picture frame of Mom and me from my graduation. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased while still breathing. What Daniel didn't know, what he never bothered to know, was that my mother had spent the last 6 years quietly rewriting the ending. She never fought my father in public. She never confronted Daniel about the favoritism. She simply observed. She listened, she remembered, and she planned. The will reading was held in a small law office downtown. Dark wood table, filtered sunlight, the kind of room where secrets sit comfortably. Daniel arrived confident. His wife Claire wore black like she was attending another ceremony of victory. They were already discussing renovations to their house in hushed, excited voices. I sat across from them in a borrowed blazer, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. The lawyer began with my father's will. As expected, Daniel inherited the majority of the visible assets, the business shares, the savings accounts, the car. I received what he called a fair gesture. Daniel smirked. Claire squeezed his hand. Then the lawyer closed that folder. "And now," she said calmly, "we'll read Mrs. Crawford's documents." Daniel blinked. Mom didn't have anything separate. The lawyer gave a thin smile. Actually, she did. 5 years ago, during a lawsuit scare involving my father's company, the house had been transferred into my mother's sole name for protection. It was never transferred back. The house Daniel had thrown me out of, legally, it had been hers, and in her will, she left it to me. I didn't react. I couldn't. My body felt suspended, like gravity had paused out of respect. Then came the trust. My grandmother, a woman Daniel rarely visited because she didn't have connections, had gifted my mother a substantial inheritance years ago. Mom didn't spend it. She built a trust. An irrevocable one. In my name. Invested carefully, grown quietly. Daniel's confidence cracked for the first time when the number was spoken aloud. It wasn't just security. It was freedom. Then the final line was read, the part my mother insisted be spoken in the room. If my daughter is hearing this, I want her to know something I failed to show loudly enough while I was alive. You were never less. You were simply unseen by someone who did not know how to look. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire stared at the table. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel small in that room. Daniel tried to contest it. He tried to argue incompetence, manipulation, unfairness, but my mother had prepared for all of it. Medical evaluations, recorded statements, legal safeguards layered like armor. She knew exactly who her son had become, and she knew exactly what her daughter would endure without protection. When the totals were finalized, Daniel paled. Not because I was wealthy, but because the narrative he'd lived in, the one where he was entitled by default, collapsed in a single afternoon. Afterward, in the hallway, he grabbed my arm. "You're not really going to keep all of that," he said. "We're family." Family. The word sounded foreign. I looked at him, not with hatred, not even with triumph, but with clarity. I am keeping what Mom left me, and I'm keeping my peace. I didn't scream, I didn't gloat. I simply walked away. That was the moment I realized something no one had ever taught me growing up. Inheritance isn't just money, it's belief. For decades, Daniel inherited confidence. I inherited doubt. But my mother's final act didn't just redistribute assets, it restored balance. 6 months later, I'm still working as a nurse. I paid off my student loans. I enrolled in an advanced practice program I once thought was out of reach. The house is rented to a young family with 2 little girls who laugh in the backyard where Mom used to grow roses. I visit sometimes, not because I need the house, but because I like to stand in the garden and remember that love can be quiet and still be powerful. Daniel downsized. Claire left. I hear things through extended relatives. I don't celebrate his losses, but I no longer carry responsibility for them either. There's a difference between forgiveness and access, and I've learned you can offer one without granting the other. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you were less capable, less deserving, less important, I want you to understand something deeply. Sometimes the loudest voices in your life are also the most wrong, and sometimes the quietest love is the one that saves you. My mother didn't fight in arguments. She fought in preparation. She fought in signatures and strategy and sleepless nights planning a future where I would never have to beg for dignity. That is what protection looks like. Not noise, not revenge, but provision. So if you stayed with me this long, thank you. Because stories like this aren't about money. They're about worth. They're about what happens when someone who was told they were nothing discovered they were everything all along. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen in your own family, share your story in the comments. And if you believe quiet strength deserves to be heard, subscribe and stay. Because sometimes the daughter they dismissed becomes the legacy they never expected.